Welcome to Washington Today for March 3rd, 2025. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thank you for joining us. President Trump said today that tariffs on goods from Mexico and Canada would go into effect tomorrow. The announcement ends a month-long delay that came after both U.S. neighbors struck temporary deals to avoid the new tariffs. The president also said he doesn't think a proposed investment deal on Ukraine's rare earth minerals is dead, and in a social media post that the U.S. will, quote, not put up with perceived resistance from Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to end Russia's war with Ukraine. Meanwhile, in London, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer announced a coalition of the willing to advance peace following a meeting with European and Canadian leaders. We'll hear from the president and the prime minister coming up. The president's comments comes as his speech to Congress tomorrow. He prepares his speech to Congress tomorrow. It's expected that a large part of it will be about his domestic agenda, and a large part of that will include his shakeup of the federal workforce. We'll look ahead at what to expect. And just 11 more days until a possible government shutdown, Punchbowl News is reporting that House Republican leaders don't plan on putting a continuing resolution on the floor until early next week. House Speaker Mike Johnson said that he wants to pass a so-called clean funding measure that will keep federal agencies open through September. But already two Republicans have come out saying they're against that, while House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries promises that no Democrats will support any bill that includes cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. The president's comments on tariffs came at a White House event announcing a $100 billion investment in new microchip manufacturing plants from Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturing. Here's what the president said.
On the tariffs, is there any room left for Canada and Mexico to make a deal before midnight? And should we expect those Chinese tariffs, the extra 10%, to take
No room left for Mexico or for Canada. No, the tariffs, they're all set. They go into effect tomorrow.
Mr. President, just to follow up on my colleague's question.
And just so you understand, vast amounts of fentanyl have poured into our country from Mexico. And as you know, also from China, where it goes to Mexico and goes to Canada. And China also had an additional 10, so it's 10 plus 10. And it comes in from Canada and it comes in from Mexico, and that's a very important thing to say.
Following the tariff announcements, the Dow Jones Industrial Average closed down around 1.5%, while the broader S&P 500 index fell nearly 2%. And the Washington Post writing this afternoon, quote, imposing tariffs on everything Americans buy from Mexico and Canada also represents an extraordinary political gamble by a president who was returned to power by voters angered over years of high inflation. The new import taxes are likely to raise the market prices of Mexican tequila, beer, and avocados, and Canadian crude oil and lumber, testing consumer patience with the president's approach. Now to Ukraine. Here's the president answering a question about that minerals deal.
Is the Ukraine minerals deal now dead, or can it be revived?
Well, I'll let you know. We're making a speech. You probably heard about it tomorrow night, so I'll let you know tomorrow night. But no, I don't think so. I think it's a great deal for us because, Biden very, very foolishly, stupidly, frankly, gave $300 billion and $350 billion more accurately to a country to fight and to try and do things. And you know what happened? We get nothing. Just gave it. We could have rebuilt our entire U.S. Navy with $350 billion. Think of it, $350 billion. We could have rebuilt our U.S. Navy. So he gave it away as fast as the money could be gone. And what we're doing is getting that all back and a lot more than that. And what we need, it's very important for this business that we're talking about here with chips and semiconductors and everything else. We need rare earths. And the deal we have is we have the finest rare earths that you can.
Mr. President, what do you need to see from President Zelensky to restart these negotiations?
Well, I just think he should be more appreciative because this country has stuck with them through thick and thin. We've given them much more than Europe, and Europe should have given more than us because, as you know, that's right there. That's the border. This country really was like the fence on the border. It was very important to Europe, and I'm not knocking Europe. I'm saying that they were a lot smarter than Joe Biden because Joe Biden didn't have a clue. He just gave money hand over fist and they should have been able to equalize with us. In other words, if we gave $1, they should have given. Well, we gave $350 billion. They probably gave $100, but on top of it all, they get their money back because they're doing it in the form of a loan, and it's a secured loan. So when I saw that, which I've known about for a little while, I said it's time for us to be smart. At the same time, it's great for them because they get us in the country taking the rare earth, which is going to fuel this big engine, and especially the engine that we've in a very short time created, and we get something, and we're there. We have a presence there. With all of that being said, I want one thing to happen. I want all of those young people to stop being killed. They're being killed by the thousands every single week. Last week, 2,700 were killed. 2,700 young, in this case, just about all young boys from Ukraine and from Russia. And that's not young people from the United States, but it's on a human basis. I want to see it stop. The money is one thing, but the death. And they're losing thousands of soldiers a week. And that's not including the people that get killed every time a town goes down or a missile goes into a town. And I want to see it stop, yes.
CNN is reporting today that top Trump cabinet secretaries and national security officials are holding meetings this week to discuss the administration's next steps on Ukraine, including the prospect of suspending military aid. Here's more from the White House.
To follow up my colleague's question, from Russia saying that your foreign policy is largely in line with their vision, should that be concerning to Americans?
Said what?
Should that be concerning to Americans?
Read the statement.
That Russia says that your administration's foreign policy is, quote, largely in line with their vision.
Well, I'll tell you what, I think it takes two to tango, and you're going to have to make a deal with Russia, and you're going to have to make a deal with Ukraine. You're going to have the assent, and you're going to have the consent from the European nations, because I think that's important, and from us. I think everybody has to get into a room, so to speak, and we have to make a deal. And the deal can be made very fast. It should not be that hard a deal to make. It can be made very fast. Now, maybe somebody doesn't want to make a deal. And if somebody doesn't want to make a deal, I think that person won't be around very long. That person will not be listened to very long because I believe that Russia wants to make a deal. I believe certainly the people of Ukraine want to make a deal. They've suffered more than anybody else. We talk about suffering. They've suffered. But if you think about it, under President Bush, they got Georgia, right? Russia got Georgia. Under President Obama, they got a nice big submarine base, a nice big chunk of land where they have their submarines. You know that, right? Crimea. Under President Trump, they got nothing. And under President Biden, they tried to get the whole thing. They tried to get the whole big Ukraine, the whole thing. If I didn't get in here, they would have gotten the whole thing. So I can only say, you can go back to Bush, you can go back to Obama, and go back to Biden. They took a lot. The only one they didn't get, you know what I gave them? I gave them anti-tank missiles. That's what I gave them. I gave them sanctions on Russia. I gave them javelins. You know the javelins? You know when they took out all those tanks? You know the tanks were heading to Kiev by the hundreds, and they were unstoppable. And I gave them javelins. So, you know, I really, Putin is the one that will tell you this has not been so good for them. The fact is that I just want fairness. I want fairness. But think of it. I gave Russia nothing except grief. I gave them nothing. I gave them sanctions and javelins. That's what I gave them. Obama gave them sheets, and you heard that statement before. It's a very famous. Trump gave them javelins, and Obama gave them sheets, and then they say how close I am to Russia. And let me tell you, we have to make a deal because there are a lot of people being killed that shouldn't be killed. But remember, Trump gave them nothing, and the other presidents gave them a lot. They gave them everything.
And the Associated Press reporting today that President Zelensky said that a deal to end the war between Ukraine and Russia is, quote, still very, very far away. The AP adds that President Zelensky still believes Ukraine's long-term partnership with the U.S. is strong enough that American support would continue. They quote President Zelensky saying, "I think our relationship will continue because it's more than an occasional relationship." Here's what President Trump had to say about that.
Now, President Zelensky supposedly made a statement today in AP. I'm not a big fan of AP, so maybe it was an incorrect statement, but he said he thinks the war's going to go on for a long time. And he better not be right about that. That's all I'm saying.
And this afternoon, Pennsylvania Republican and Congressional Ukraine Caucus co-chair Brian Fitzpatrick posting on X, quote, "I just had a lengthy and productive one-on-one conversation with President Volodymyr Zelensky's chief of staff, Andrei Yermak. We are 100% getting this train back on the tracks. This mineral deal will be signed in short order, which will lead to a strong long-term economic partnership between the United States and Ukraine, and which will ultimately and naturally lead to security assistance. Europe will be required to step up and do its part, and there will be mandates for them to do just that. Stay tuned for further details." Well, a different tone coming from London this morning. Here's what British Prime Minister Keir Starmer had to say in the House of Commons after he hosted a meeting of Western leaders about their support for Ukraine.
And, Mr. Speaker, it was a productive summit. Together we agreed a clear strategy that the United Kingdom, France and our allies will work closely with Ukraine on a plan to stop the fighting, which we will then discuss directly with the United States. It's a plan that has 4 clear principles, which I'll now share in full with the House. First, that we must keep the military aid to Ukraine flowing, keep increasing the economic pressure on Russia, and to that end, alongside our partnership on air defence, we're doubling down on military aid. Already this year, we've taken our support to record levels. But on Saturday, we also agreed a new £2.2 billion loan for Ukraine, backed not by the British taxpayer, but by the profits from frozen Russian assets. Second, Mr. Speaker, we agreed that any lasting peace must guarantee the sovereignty and security of Ukraine, and that Ukraine must be at the table when negotiating their future. That is absolutely vital. Third, we agreed that in the event of a peace deal, we will continue to boost Ukraine's defences and Ukraine's deterrence. And finally, fourth, we agreed to develop a coalition of the willing, ready to defend a deal in Ukraine and guarantee the peace. Mr. Speaker, after all, the Ukrainian position is completely understandable. For them, the war did not begin 3 years ago. That was merely the latest and most brutal escalation. They have signed agreements with Putin before. They've experienced the nature of his diplomacy and the calibre of his word. We cannot accept a weak deal like Minsk again.
Prime Minister Starmer telling BBC that he felt, quote, uncomfortable after seeing Friday's White House meeting between Presidents Trump and Zelensky. He said his response was to call both men that night in an effort to, quote, get us back to the central focus. He went on to tell the BBC, quote, there are a number of different routes people can go down. One is to ramp up the rhetoric as to how outraged we all are or not. The other option was to roll up my sleeves and quickly phone both men and then also speak to French President Emmanuel Macron about the role that the leading nations of Europe would play, because my reaction was, we have to bridge this. We have to find a way that we can all work together, because in the end, we've had 3 years of bloody conflict now, and we need to get to that lasting peace. Here's what Prime Minister Starmer had to say about the UK's role in a peace effort.
Mr. Speaker, we agreed on Sunday that those willing to play a role in this will intensify planning now. And as this House would expect, Britain will play a leading role with, if necessary, and together with others, boots on the ground and planes in the air. Mr. Speaker, it is right that Europe do the heavy lifting to support peace on our continent. But to succeed, this effort must also have strong US backing. I want to assure this House I take none of this lightly. I've visited British troops in Estonia, and no aspect of my role weighs more heavily than the deployment of British troops in the service of defence and security in Europe. And yet I do feel very strongly that the future of Ukraine is vital for our national security. Russia is a menace in our waters and skies. They've launched cyber attacks on our NHS, assassination attempts in our streets. In this House, we stand by Ukraine because it's the right thing to do. But we also stand by them because it's in our interest to do so. Because if we do not achieve a lasting peace, then the instability and insecurity that has hit the living standards of working people in Britain, that will only get worse. And Putin's appetite for conflict and chaos, that will only grow. So a strong peace, a just peace, a lasting peace, that has now to be our goal. It is vital, it is in our interests, and its pursuit, Britain will lead from the front for the security of our continent, the security of our country, and the security of the British people. We must now win the peace.
You can see all of today's proceedings in the House of Commons at cspan.org and the C-SPAN Now mobile video app. On Capitol Hill today, House Speaker Mike Johnson posted a picture on X of a view looking out onto the House floor and writing, quote, "Preparations are underway to welcome POTUS for his joint address to Congress tomorrow night. It's going to be big." We'll have full coverage of the speech across the C-SPAN networks. It's President Trump's first address of his second term. Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer talked about the speech earlier today on the floor.
Now, tomorrow, Americans can expect Donald Trump to say many things that are false, including perhaps Russian information. What we will not hear from Donald Trump, however, is the truth. So today, let us speak the truth about Donald Trump's agenda. In a little over a month, Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and Republicans have set in motion the greatest transfer of wealth in favor of billionaires we have seen in modern times. On the one hand, you have Elon Musk calling Social Security the greatest Ponzi scheme of all time. You have Doge firing over 7,000 staffers from the Social Security Administration. You have Donald Trump threatening trade wars with our own allies. And you have Republicans cutting $880 billion from Medicaid to pay for their billionaire tax cuts. Money that funds things like community health centers, money that funds people who desperately need health care, money that funds parents or elderly parents of middle-aged couples in the parents are in nursing homes. All of that is at grave risk. Together, these actions will mean diminished wealth for working and middle Americans and more money in the pockets of the billionaires. Because after all, when the wealthiest man on earth calls Social Security a scam and Doge fires 7,000 Social Security staffers, that's a clear sign Social Security benefits are in danger. Donald Trump just said a few minutes ago that he was going to keep the tariffs against Canada and Mexico. When Donald Trump starts a trade war for Canada and Mexico, it means rising costs for produce, for groceries, for cars, even for ordering takeout and happy hour. It is unbelievable what they're doing with these tariffs. It could mean that restaurant owners in states like mine could be forced to close down as food prices go up. It means that building new homes will be more expensive, and those costs will be passed down to would-be home buyers. The bottom line is very simple. One of the greatest things Americans complained about in the past election was the high costs of so many different kinds of goods and products. And now Donald Trump is making it worse because he just said that he would not continue the pause on Canada and Mexico's tariffs, but will let them go into effect. Please, Mr. Trump, rethink your plans to start a trade war, or the average family will get slapped with an average $2,000 extra in costs. Families will suffer, businesses will suffer. You said you'd bring down costs on day one, Donald Trump. Yet here, 1 month in, you're doing something that would raise costs significantly for the American people.
And here's Real Clear Politics White House reporter Philip Wegman on what he's looking for tomorrow night.
Well, all of us are going to be looking for Elon Musk, the leader of Doge. And the reason we're going to be looking at him is because he's a manifestation of so much of what this administration has done during their first third of 100 days, right? One of the things that is very apparent as Donald Trump goes to speak to lawmakers is that this is his show. He's moving fast on his own with regards to executive action. I mean, if you think about what he's done to remake the federal bureaucracy, some of these trade deals that he's tried to push through, his unilateral enforcement of immigration. This is not going to be a lame duck presidency. He's not waiting around for Congress. He's moving on his own. Elon Musk is a good example of that. Certainly, he's someone who has cut a lot of jobs, cut a lot of red tape, and I think that he will likely be there in the balcony. I'm not sure who the other guests will be beyond the First Lady and some others, but again, this is Donald Trump informing Congress what he has done on his own as they still get their ducks in a row for the legislative process for that tax bill.
Last week was a parade of international visitors at the White House. What's on tap for this week? Do we know if the president is going to be going anywhere after his address to Congress tomorrow night to sort of sell whatever it is he talks about tomorrow night?
Well, what we've seen is Ukrainian President Zelensky is very much continuing the tour in Europe as that continent asks themselves if they need to be more responsible for their own security because they're questioning whether the United States is a reliable partner. I can tell you, this White House, they did not expect it to go down like this. I had a number of sources reaching out saying that they didn't expect Zelensky to act that way in the Oval Office. Certainly the Ukrainian president didn't expect Donald Trump or J.D. Vance to respond in that way. But, if you look at the parade of world leaders that were here just last week, whether it was French President Emmanuel Macron or British Prime Minister Starmer, they certainly thought that they were building momentum towards the foundation for a peace deal. All of that is in flux right now. And so the question for tomorrow's speech is, how will Donald Trump switch gears? Remember, the last thing that he said as Zelensky left was that he was ready to invite him back, but only when Zelensky was willing to negotiate on Donald Trump's terms.
Our live coverage begins at 8 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow night with a preview of the evening from Capitol Hill. That's followed by the president's speech at 9 p.m. Eastern. Following that, you can see the Democratic response, which will be given by Michigan Senator Alyssa Slotkin. And then after that, we'll take your calls and get your reaction on social media. And we'll also bring you reaction from lawmakers live from the Capitol. You can see that on C-SPAN 2. But again, it all starts at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. As we mentioned, Punchbowl News reporting today that House Republican leadership plans on waiting until next week before putting a continuing resolution on the floor to keep the government funded past March 14th. Here's Speaker Johnson talking about that yesterday on Meet the Press.
We are working hard to do our responsibility to keep the government open. Democrats have to help negotiate this, and they've, to this point, shown no interest in finding a reasonable solution for that. We're looking to pass a clean CR to freeze funding at current levels to make sure that the government can stay open while we begin to incorporate all these savings that we're finding through the Doge effort and these other sources of revenue that President Trump's policies are bringing to the table. And then for FY26, for the next fiscal year, you're going to see a very different process and a lot more efficient and effective spending for the people. We look forward to that.
But, Mr. Speaker, of course, Republicans control the White House, the House, and the Senate. So isn't it on Republicans to keep the government open, and will you do so?
Well, government funding is always bipartisan. You have to have partners on both sides of the aisle to do it, and we need our Democrat colleagues to come to the table and be reasonable about that. They want to use government funding as some sort of weapon against President Trump and his administration, and that is not the way this is supposed to work. Republicans are going to do the responsible thing. We're going to do our duty and keep the government open, and we're working in good faith negotiated in good faith with our colleagues in Congress to get that done. And I hope everyone will come to the table and do their job.
And TheHill.com writing today, quote, "The comments from the speaker reflect the reality of the situation. With little time left before the deadline and no bipartisan deal in sight, lawmakers will have to look to move a stopgap rather than the 12 appropriations bills that are typically used to fund the government. The CR will have to be bipartisan because Republicans have a slim majority in the House, and the Senate GOP conference needs at least 60 votes to clear such measure." House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries put out a statement yesterday that read, quote, "House Democrats are committed to funding the government in a manner that promotes the economic well-being, health, and safety of everyday Americans." The top Democrat on the Appropriations Committee, Rosa DeLauro, remains ready, willing, and able to talk with our Republican colleagues, but there has been zero outreach from the Trump administration, and House Republicans have walked away from the negotiating table. As the recent budget resolution vote made clear, there will be no support for partisan legislation that fails to protect the quality of life of the American people, most importantly with respect to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. Unfortunately, it appears that Republicans who control the House, the Senate, and the presidency are once again determined to shut the government down and hurt everyday Americans. That is a statement from House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries. Now, here's NBC News senior congressional reporter Scott Wong breaking it all down earlier this morning on Washington Journal.
We saw Speaker of the House Mike Johnson appear on our network, Meet the Press at NBC, over the weekend. He said that Republicans want to push forward on a full year CR that would carry the government, fund the government through at current funding levels through the fiscal year, which would bring us to September 30th. The deadline is less than 2 weeks away, March 14th. And so government funding will run out. We are at a risk of a shutdown. The two sides, Democrats and Republicans, are still far apart on any sort of top line numbers. Democrats' line in the last many days has been, well, Republicans, you control the entirety of the federal government. You guys should figure out how to fund the government. Obviously, given what we know about the breakdown of the House of Representatives, Mike Johnson can only afford one, maybe two defections at most on any vote. We know that there are at least two Republicans who oppose any sort of short-term stopgap funding that we call a CR, and so the math becomes very difficult. Mike Johnson will almost certainly need Democrats to come to the table and help him pass any sort of funding bill to avert a shutdown on March 14th. And so we're in this very tricky, precarious situation. Once again, staring down a potential shutdown in just a couple weeks.
Should the idea of a full year resolution really be that hard? I mean, we're only talking about 7 months. We're 5 months into the fiscal year now. So when we say full year, we're only talking about a 7 month
it's not a full
resolution.
year. You know, Congress is notorious for kicking the can down the road with the short-term funding resolutions that we call CRs. And this case is no different. And so what Johnson has said over the weekend is that, look, this is what he said last year as well. We're not going to do any more CRs. You know, CRs are horrible for the country. It doesn't allow the country to plan ahead. And yet we're in this exact same situation, more CRs.
And then explain what Democrats will be looking for here in the next couple of weeks as we come up to this government funding deadline. And so what leverage do they have for what they're looking for? How can they get something out of this?
What some of them want is a promise written into this resolution saying that the money that Congress appropriates, remember Congress has the power of the purse, will be spent by the executive branch, by the Trump administration. Normally, that's not a big issue. Normally, that's the way it does work. But in this case, Congress appropriated money, and Trump has said that, you know, we're trying to scale back the size of government. I've created this DOGE department with Elon Musk at its head, and we are cutting spending even though Congress has appropriated this money. This is where you're seeing a clash of separation of powers, except for the fact that Republicans control the United States Congress, the legislative branch, and the Congress, the GOP-controlled Congress, so far has said we're okay with what we've seen the Trump administration do and the DOJ department do.
NBC News senior congressional reporter Scott Wong on this morning's Washington Journal. You can see the whole discussion at cspan.org and the C-SPAN Now mobile app. You're listening to Washington Today.
Discover the heartbeat of democracy with C-SPAN's Voices. As we hear from you ahead of President Trump's address to Congress, we're asking what you'd like to hear from the president during his speech.
My name is Marcos Lizarraga. I'm a student at Pepperdine University, and I'm from Los Angeles, California. And an issue that I want the president to address in his next meeting with Congress is I want him to address the validity of Elon Musk's email to federal employees, asking them for 5 bullet points as to what they've accomplished in the past week. I feel like that action is very unlawful, and I'd love some more elaboration on his part on why these emails are being sent out to federal employees.
I'm Maggie Lyons, and I would love to hear the president talk about the National Apprenticeship Program.
Hello, my name is William Wolke. I'm originally from East Tennessee. I'm a third-year doctoral student at the University of Delaware, and I really think the president should be talking about youth homelessness in his upcoming congressional briefing.
Hey, my name is Thomas. I'm from Brazil, and I would like the president to talk about the environment because I think it's one of the greatest challenges of the century, and it impacts my home country.
My name is Audrey. I'm from Philadelphia, and I hope the president addresses science funding.
C-SPAN's Voices, delivering democracy unfiltered. Be part of the conversation.
Welcome back to Washington Today. Senate Finance and Appropriations Ranking Members Patty Murray and Ron Wyden, along with Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota, talked to reporters today about Social Security, specifically Elon Musk's comments calling Social Security a Ponzi scheme. Here's Senator Murray.
The American people should realize the Social Security administration is already at its lowest level of staffing in 50 years. That's why fewer than 40% of people who call to talk to a Social Security agent get through to talk to someone. That's why it takes, on average, 240 days to process a disability claim. And that's why last year an estimated 30,000 Americans died while waiting on a decision about their disability benefits. Yet Trump and Elon are now loudly declaring they want to significantly reduce staff further. They told SSA to draw up plans to cut staff by 50%, and their hand-picked acting commissioner is proudly declaring he wants to cut at least 7,000 Social Security Administration workers. And Trump and Elon are now pushing all Social Security Administration employees out the door. They are threatening their employees with future firings and forced reassignments while offering financial incentives to leave. That is an offer that went to everyone at the agency. I want to make sure everyone understands a few things. 90% of the SSA staff work across the country outside of the agency's headquarters at over 1,200 field offices to make sure that they are available to help people in every part of our country. Staff who are not providing direct service support perform critical work that keeps the agency and Social Security system operational, including supporting the agency's IT infrastructure. Elon and DOJ are positively gleeful in touting that these staffing reductions, and they are working to close as many Social Security offices as they can get away with.
And here's Senator Klobuchar on Social Security benefits and their impact on seniors.
So, 73 million Americans rely on Social Security for at least part of their income. Think about that. 4 in 10 seniors, it is the majority of their income. Men and women at the Social Security Administration, as Patty was pointing out, the reason they are in the local districts is a lot of our seniors, we all know this, and you probably know this from your own parents or grandparents, they rely on being able to talk to people. They bring in the papers they get in the mail or some email they got, and there can be a lot of confusion for anyone in dealing with it. But then you're trying to figure out what happened to my husband's benefits. What happens to my brother who's now in assisted living? I don't know what to do. They come to our offices all the time, and who do we call? We call the locals. If they're able to go over there and meet with them, they do, or at least our staff talks to them. This is a daily occurrence for so many seniors. So they are not just cutting off the lifeline with what the threats that are being made to Medicaid and Social Security. They are cutting off the people that process the 9 million applications for benefits every year, 80 million calls, 1,000 offices that get more than 30 million visits a year. I am all for effective government. When I managed an office, about 400 employees, I made a bunch of changes because I believed in reform and effective government. But when any business person comes in and wants to make some changes, they look at the whole picture. They decide, okay, we're going to cut this line. I'm going to make some changes to the number of employees. And they do it in a careful, thoughtful way. That is not what this is. As the former Social Security Commissioner put it, you're going to see the system collapse if this keeps on.
President Trump has nominated Frank Bisignano, the CEO of the financial technology company Fiserv, to be the new commissioner of the Social Security Administration. He has yet to sit for Senate confirmation hearings. You can see more from the Senate Democrats at cspan.org and the C-SPAN Now mobile app. Elise Stefanik, President Trump's pick to serve as U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, spoke this morning at an event hosted by the Anti-Defamation League in New York City. And the Jewish Telegraphic Agency reporting on the event said that she got a mixed reaction, but that ADL CEO Jonathan Greenblatt called her, quote, exactly what we need at the United Nations. The story goes on to say that Greenblatt's comment, quote, accentuates how the ADL has shifted its approach to Trump since he entered the White House for his first term. The ADL was consistently critical of Trump at that point and at the Never Is Now conference following Trump's 2016 election, alluding to Trump floating the creation of a registry of Muslims. Greenblatt had vowed to register as a Muslim in solidarity. Here's what Elise Stefanik had to say this morning.
We know the United Nations is indeed a deep den of anti-Semitism, infected with the same rampant anti-Israel and anti-American hate and moral rot that has polluted America's higher education system. Especially since the barbaric Hamas attacks of October 7th, the UN has continuously betrayed Israel, betraying America in the process, acting instead as an apologist for Iran and Iran's terrorist proxies. Under President Trump, as United States Ambassador to the United Nations, the days of propping up organizations that run counter to our interest are long gone. We will no longer fund terrorism, anti-Semitism, and anti-Israel hate. That stops immediately. And I am so proud that President Trump has the strongest record of any American president when it comes to standing with Israel. From moving the U.S. Embassy to its rightful place, Israel's eternal capital of Jerusalem, to negotiating the historic Abraham Accords, the greatest stride towards peace normalization in more than a quarter century, to aligning U.S. Central Command with Israel, a change that fostered daily communications with the IDF, joint exercises, and crucial coordination with British and Arab partners that helped defend against the unprecedented Iranian attacks against Israel last year. And I believe it's quite obvious to the world that if President Trump had remained in office, October 7th would never have happened. He has brought his pro-Israel policies to the White House, and in just a month, the world has watched as President Trump reasserts America First peace through strength foreign policy. Only 12 hours after his re-election, Hamas terrorists called for an immediate end to the war, a direct result of President Trump's restoration of American strength to the world stage. Innocent hostages taken by Hamas terrorists have been returned home, as President Trump promised all hell if they were not brought back. And we will continue to work until every hostage comes back home and is returned home.
That is Elise Stefanik, President Trump's pick to be UN ambassador at the Anti-Defamation League event today in New York City. And we heard from First Lady Melania Trump for the first time since her husband took office for a second time. The First Lady held a roundtable discussion on Capitol Hill about the Take It Down Act. That's a bill that boosts protections for victims of deepfake porn.
In today's AI-driven world, the threat of privacy breaches is alarmingly high. As organizations harness the power of our data, the risk of unauthorized access and misuses of personal information escalates. We must prioritize robust security measures and uphold strict ethical standards to protect individual privacy. As First Lady, my commitment to the Be Best initiative underscores the importance of online safety. In an era where digital interactions are integral to daily life, it is imperative that we safeguard children from mean-spirited and hurtful online behavior. Ensuring their protection is not just a responsibility, but a vital step in nurturing tomorrow's leaders. Here with us today is Alison Berry, a 15-year-old brave young woman. Alison Spears used AI to create non-consensual intimate images of her and then spread the images across social media. They superimposed her face into pornographic content without her consent, solely to humiliate her. And authored, Alison's family contacted the social media companies for help. Their efforts fell upon deaf ears. Ultimately, the fake images circulated worldwide. It's heartbreaking to witness young teens, especially girls, grappling with the overwhelming challenges posed by malicious online content, like deepfakes. This toxic environment can be severely damaging. We must prioritize their well-being by equipping them with support and tools necessary to navigate this hostile digital landscape.
We heard the First Lady mention Alison Berry. Here's what she had to say.
I was just 14 years old when a classmate created AI nudes of me from an innocent social media picture. I was 14 years old when I was violated all over social media, and I was just 14 years old when my innocence was stripped away. October 2nd, 2023, I woke up to messages from a friend notifying me that these photos of me were circulating social media, pictures from a past Instagram photo with a nude body and my face attached, made from AI. Fear, shock, and disgust were just some of the many emotions I felt. I felt responsible and began to blame myself and was ashamed to tell my parents despite doing nothing wrong. As I attended school, I was scared of the reactions of someone could recreate these photos, and I lived in fear that they would resurface and that they would get brought up as I attended school. The school was little to no help and said that it was out of their control. I not only blamed the classmate Big Tech. The boy used a Google app called DNGG that existed to remove articles of clothing from a photo available for all ages for free. While that app is no longer available, thousands of other apps similar are available. Additionally, social media needs to be required to take action. It wasn't until Ted Cruz's office heard my story and reached out to Snapchat personally, and then my photos were removed. We need to hold Big Tech accountable to take action. I came here today to not only promote this bill, but to fight for the freedom of so many survivors. Millions of people, male, female, teenage, children, kids, all are affected by the rise of this image-based sexual abuse. This is unacceptable. The Take It Down Act will give a voice to the victims and provide justice. I want to say thank you to Senator Ted Cruz and his team. Thank you to all the advocates pushing this bill and this legislation. It is vital for the growing of technology. The situation is bigger than politics. This bipartisan bill is to protect America's children. Thank you to the First Lady and the House and the House leadership for understanding how important this issue is and taking time to learn about this vital piece of legislation. I share my story to give victims a voice they never heard and had changed this horrible situation into something good. Thank you to everyone who is supporting this. It is so inspiring to know that my voice is being heard, giving hope to not only me, but to all the many people that have been affected by this. It is truly so amazing how this awful situation has turned into good. Thank you.
That's Elliston Berry talking about her experience with deepfake porn and the Take It Down Act that was introduced by Republican Senator Ted Cruz of Texas. And according to a statement from his office, the bill, quote, would criminalize the publication of non-consensual intimate imagery and require social media and similar websites to have in place procedures to remove such content upon notification from a victim. The Take It Down Act passed the Senate with bipartisan support last year and again last month, but it is yet to pass the House. You can see all of this event on Capitol Hill at cspan.org and C-SPAN Now. And former Florida Representative Lincoln Diaz-Balart passed away today following a battle with cancer. He was born on August 13th, 1954 in Havana, Cuba. He is the son of the late Cuban politician Rafael Diaz-Balart. Initially active in the Democratic Party, Lincoln Diaz-Balart switched his allegiance to the Republican Party in 1985. He served in the Florida State House of Representatives and in the state Senate before going on to serve 18 years in the House, representing Florida's 21st congressional district. He retired in 2011. Here he is from 1992 in the C-SPAN video library.
Representative Lincoln Diaz-Balart was elected earlier this year. When was your election?
Well, actually, the election was in September, the primary election. I had no opponent in the November election. So as of September, my election was over for 1992.
You were actually born in Havana, Cuba, is that correct?
That's correct. I was born in Cuba, and in 1959 came to the United States with my family. At that time, I wasn't yet 5.
What is life like in Cuba today?
Well, it's a truly desperate situation that confronts the Cuban people. Castro has managed to turn what was an economically prosperous country, and one that when you look at the indicators in comparative terms with other Latin American countries was always among the top. Castro has managed to turn that economy into total shambles, and in addition to that, has spent over 3 decades oppressing the people, really to a degree that has not been seen in this hemisphere before. So I think that we will soon see an end to the Castro regime. I'm convinced of that. But it has taken, unfortunately, a long time. And the suffering that the people in Cuba are going through is really not only unfortunate, it's tragic, and it's something that no people deserve.
You can see more about Lincoln Diaz-Balart at cspan.org. That's also where you can find this program as a podcast. It's also on our C-SPAN Now mobile app, and you can find it wherever you get your podcasts, and it's on YouTube. Just search Washington Today. And for more on the stories that are shaping Washington every day, get our daily email, word for word. Just go to cspan.org/connect to subscribe. I'm Gary Sterkoff. Thanks a lot for listening today to Washington Today.
C-SPAN's Washington Journal, our live forum involving you to discuss the latest issues in government, politics, and public policy, from Washington to across the country. Coming up Tuesday morning, we'll talk with Philip Wallach, Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, about President Trump's joint address to Congress tonight and the current balance of power between the executive and legislative branches. And then former IRS Commissioner Daniel Werfel discusses concerns about how layoffs at the Internal Revenue Service could affect tax collection. C-SPAN's Washington Journal. Join in the conversation live at 7 Eastern Tuesday morning on C-SPAN, C-SPAN Now, or online at cspan.org.